Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, we got the students leading the way, so let's try that again and let's have the adults. Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Vicki Nishioka, and I want to welcome you to our REL Northwest Bridge event. And we are here today to talk about eliminating disparities in school disciplines, strengthening teacher-student relationships in diverse classrooms. So hopefully you're here to talk about that. If you wandered in because we look like we are a fun crowd and we have cookies and coffee, then you're welcome to stay and join the conversation. So. REL Northwest is a program that is based at Education Northwest, and this is where we're at. We are downtown Portland. Love to have visitors. We have actually workspaces for visitors, so if you are in the Portland area and you want to come talk to us about our programs, then this is where we're at. REL Northwest is one of 10 regional educational laboratories, and that's really kind of a mouthful, isn't it? But 10 regional educational laboratories across the U.S. that serve districts and practitioners like you who are doing the important work. And what we try to do is help you and partner with you on using data and evidence to address compelling problems of practice. This particular topic, we've been working with a group of practitioners for the last 5 years in Oregon, and now we are also working and getting questions from across the Northwest region. Our region is the Northwest states, but this particular event is being live streamed nationally, and I've been getting emails from people across the United States asking about it, so there is a great deal of energy, a great deal of commitment, I think, to really resolving this problem and really making progress and bringing equity to school discipline practices in the U.S. What we're trying to do today, and what we hope you walk away with today, is that you'll gain a better understanding. I look across this room and I know we have partners, we have people who are very knowledgeable and skilled in this area, but we want to engage you in a different perspective and more conversation so that you can gain a better understanding about root causes of disproportionate discipline practices. We want to begin to learn more about teachers and students' perspectives on building relationships in the classroom. We've done a lot of work at the policy level, but we really want to say, how do we help and what do we do to make classroom environments more welcoming and the relationships between the teacher and student a more welcoming and an optimum learning environment. The third thing we want to do is we want to learn about evidence-based strategies that strengthen relationships with students from different racial or cultural backgrounds. We also want to set aside some times to take questions from you, and so we will have times for question and answer. So we have two people here that are Jacob, raise your hand, and Laura, where are you? Raise your hand, who will have walking mics during question and answers. And so if you have a question, just raise your hand, and they can either hand you the mic so that you can talk, or you can tell them the question and they will repeat the question through the microphone, so it's up to you. I want to recognize these types of events don't happen by themselves, and they certainly don't happen through the efforts of one person. And so I wanted to kind of walk through. We had a great deal of thought partners, we had a great deal of resources and energy in putting this together, so I want to recognize those folks now. We received support from Oregon Response to Instruction and Intervention. Dave Putnam and Sally Helton, you want to raise your hand? They were there and actually are responsible for this great venue and for the cookies and coffee and water that you have over there. So if you get a chance, give them a hand and say thank you. Yeah. Oregon RTI provides technical assistance to Oregon school districts implementing response to intervention systems that focus on literacy, early intervention, and evidence-based practices. Portland Youth Builders is another strong partner. Dr. Elise Huggins, education manager, and Rhonda Useman, who wasn't able to make it, are here, and they're the reason why we are able to have a student educator panel today. The students from Portland Youth Builders are here to tell us about their experiences, to make recommendations and tell us what we could do to make things better. Portland Youth Builders is an organization that provides education, vocational training, and leadership development services for over 200 young people who are working to complete high school. They are the ones, so when we get to the student panel, keep in mind that it was through their efforts and that we have developed questions and we are able to have student voice as part of this event. Our third co-sponsor is Oregon Leadership Network, and way in the back is Rob Larson, who heads that up. Raise your hand, Rob. Oregon Leadership Network is a statewide network that is committed to building the capacity of education leaders to sustain research-based equitable practices in Oregon. 5 years ago, the Oregon Leadership Network made equity in school discipline a priority, and it's one of the drivers that made today's event possible. They were the ones that saw this vision, they're the ones that told us this is what needs to happen, and they are why we are here today. I want to recognize they also have the foresight to say we want to put together a working group of people who are skilled, people who are connected to both students, to schools, to administrators, to help you think through this work, to help us to really make and move that dial as we move forward. So I want to recognize the Equity and Behavioral Practices Work Group. This work group has been meeting for 5 years. And in the very beginning, they have told and partnered with REL Northwest. They told us this is what we need, this is where we need to go, and then and each year they tell us this is our next step. And 2 years ago they said, we need to figure out how to support students and teachers in the classroom so that we can strengthen relationships, so that we can begin to build and reach across differences, and we can begin to start those conversations and really truly begin to eliminate discipline disparities. And that's why we brought Anne Gregory here today. Want to know if now one of the things that we have Wi-Fi, and we want to make sure that you are engaged in this event, not only through speakers, but also through Twitter. This is our REL Northwest. Follow us and add to that conversation. We'd love to have it happen. When we began to think about who can we bring, we at Education Northwest, in the very beginning, the first question that the working group told us is we need to know what's happening in terms of research and evidence. So we did a literature summary. And if you know, our sponsor is the Institute of Education Sciences. They have a pretty high threshold for rigor, and we are not going to make you read the research studies that they expect us to have, because I think many of you would take your afternoon nap. But when we began to look who is doing work in this area, we screened over 12,000 articles and found 12 that met the rigor, that was focused on eliminating discipline disparities, and during that time was the first time that we learned about Anne Gregory's work. She was included in that literature summary, and then we just updated it and looked at 3,000 more articles that came out since 2012, and Anne Gregory's name came up again. So it was a match made in heaven. So I can't think of anyone who can help us think more deeply about equity in school discipline than our speaker today. And I want to give you a little bit of time to a little bit about her background, and then I want to invite her to come and share her work. We set out some articles and some interviews to you folks that are just telling us a little bit about what she's doing. And what I appreciated about Anne is not only does she like research, and she does, and she's really good at it, she really wants to make sure that what she says speaks to the field. So I think that I see her not as somebody who's describing the work and describing the problem. I see her as leading the work to find a solution that's going to work and eliminate discipline disparities. Anne is an associate professor in the Department of Applied Psychology at Rutgers University. Her work and research has focused on racial disparities in school discipline. She looks at what's causing it, what are underlying strategies that work, including ways to strengthen teacher-student relationships and pioneering new directions for teacher professional development and restorative approaches to discipline. What we know is schools are making a difference One of the strategies and one of the things they do is they provide resources and supports to classroom teachers and students in the classrooms to really address this important problem. Dr. Gregory served on the Discipline Disparities Collaborative funded by the Atlantic Philanthropies, which convene lawyers, researchers, advocates, and youth leaders to address gaps in our knowledge and about disparities. They are identifying promising policy reforms and synthesizing what schools can do to change patterns in school discipline. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ann Gregory.
Thank you so much, Vicki, for such a warm welcome. Good afternoon. I have lots in store today. I think this might be the longest PowerPoint I've ever put together. I went over the 100 mark. So let's, fasten seatbelts. You can access this PowerPoint, and thus, as I move very quickly, you can refer back. Okay, so I want to engage you in this and not PowerPointify you. But at the same time, I have a lot of information to deliver, and I've integrated some discussions. So those of you who are sitting together at the table, you'll have opportunities to do some pair and share and talk about some of these concepts. So I promised to cover many practical strategies. So I am very appreciative of the need for actionable, I love that word, actionable ideas. You all, I want you to walk away with very practical ideas to take back to your districts. I really appreciate the urgency. So I began this work with a real passion for social justice and change. Continue with that today. So today we're here with a common concern, and I think this bar graph here, or sorry, this line graph, is really brings it to light. This is unfortunately all too familiar, and we see here the top line is African American students and the increasing suspension rate for this group over time. More recently, as many of you are aware, many states and districts are reducing their use of suspension, but the gaps are really remaining in many, many districts. So we can kind of look at this kind of data and really intellectualize it. But I'm going to ask us today to keep the heart in this. And I think it helps that we have students here so they can talk about the heart side, how they've been affected by issues of discipline and positive or negative relationships with teachers. If we think about a discipline incident, it's a very fraught emotional experience. There's anger, there's upset, there's lost opportunity for learning, teachers leaving the profession because of the stress of the events, families and students affected. So the urgency is profound. So as I race through information today, let's not lose sight of the kind of humanity of these issues. Today I'm going to focus on racial disparities in discipline with a big caveat. How many of you in your districts have found these groups are overrepresented in the use of exclusionary discipline? Raise your hand if you might. Okay, so this is ringing a bell here. The root cause issue is quite complex. I do not like to be reductionistic. There's plenty of research to show us that there's many, many contributors fueling disparities in discipline. And they're reinforcing and overlapping. And we do this research where we try to pick each variable out. But we know in reality they're all transacting with one another. So again, we don't want to get too reductionistic, silver bullety, one single contributor. But at the same time, I do want to offer you some precision in our thinking about racial disparities in discipline. And this is where I'm at these days. I've reviewed a lot of the evidence, and I've come to this framework. It really has helped my thinking, pushed me along, and I think it has implications for intervention. So these are interrelated dynamics, and I think that we have to really, I'm going to kind of break down each of these. But I also think we have to spend some time together recognizing racial inequality and having that courageous conversation to do so. And I believe this requires us to take a hard look, which isn't always easy given how hard educators work, at issues of race, power, and privilege in our schools. So we have to kind of have the audacity to take that minute to step away from the feeling of blame and think about then moving into incremental change. So we need to take pause. And this is, I think, what you all are engaged in. And I also want to, here's another caveat. I'm going to be referencing black and white gaps in discipline. And you're going to hear me use these terms, kind of thinking about African American students relative to white students, because that's the evidence base I'm drawing from. Unfortunately, I cannot speak as definitively about racial disparities with other groups. We just don't have the same amount of evidence. So keep that in mind today as a caveat. So differential processing, we have research evidence that black students can be subject to differential processing once they're referred to discipline. So what this means is they can be issued harsher sanctions for the very same behavior that a white student has engaged in. So in other words, they're processed unfairly. I'm drawing from the justice language here about processing. This has been convincingly shown when we account for SES, gender, special ed status, number of referrals, and reasons for referrals. Now I find this some of you, most of you know this already, but I just want to take a minute to just recognize how that's painful to hear. So we enter into this profession, I think, with the faith of having fair schooling. We want to have fair places. We don't want to be part of a system that perpetuates racial opportunity gaps. Now, differential selection is another kind of framework that I think about. We know less about this from research, but people reference the fact that black students are referred more than other groups for perceived insubordination and disrespect as support for the statement on the screen. So the notion here is that a referral for insubordination and disrespect could reflect cultural dissonance or cultural asynchrony, where teachers rely on their own cultural norms and can negatively judge body language, vocal tone. So we can ask ourselves, if we follow this line of reasoning, what types of behaviors take you out of your comfort zone that clash with your own upbringing of what proper behavior looks like? Do I expect a student to look me in the eye? Do I expect them to lower their voice around authority? What about roughhousing? When does it start looking threatening and overly aggressive? When does my racial and cultural upbringing, what does that have to do with how I perceive behavior? This is kind of a big picture question for us to think about today. And I wanted to I've held back on showing you millions of research studies because that was my instinct, but they told me to prune those, so just one, okay? You can see all the citations on the bottom though. They got reduced to citations, but this study, I don't know if anyone caught this, it came out a couple weeks ago. They asked preschool teachers to watch a video of preschoolers and said, can you detect signs of misbehavior? And they were eye gaze tracking technology. And they found that the preschool teachers watched African American kids for misbehavior more than other groups, despite them in the video having no higher likelihood of misbehavior. So if we think about it, does that mean teachers have this priming for kind of watching for misbehavior? And it sadly made me think of that phrase, driving while black. Is it preschool while black? Very disturbing to think about that. Now, less discussed, but no less disturbing, is this notion of access. So given the legacy of racial and economic segregation in schools and unequal schooling and institutionalized racism today, not all students have fair access to supportive and inclusive school environments. And that's been shown in a lot of different dimensions. But it's also been shown repeatedly when it comes to discipline in schools. So here's just a couple studies that have shown this, but one in particular I point out. That no matter what your behavior is, if you attend a school with more black students, it increases your risk of being suspended, simply by attending that school, not based on your behavior. So I find this particularly hard to live with, that the very school a student attends, based on where he or she lives, moves that student one step closer to suspension. Now, Payne and Welsh have done some work in this area as well, and they've shown that a study showed that when there was a greater percentage of black students in the school, there was less likely principals were to respond with behavior using restorative approaches. Okay, so I've oriented you in breakneck speed to this framework that's guiding some of my thinking these days. And we can see from this framework, there's kind of multiple entry points, multiple dynamics happening. And again, as I said earlier, I think that this means there's multiple entry points for transformation. And in terms of research, we're still really working on this. But from the ecology and the complexities of schooling in this issue, I think we can all agree there's no magic bullet. Hopefully we would have found that magic bullet earlier. And we present this, a framework in this book that recently came out. And in your packet, you will find one piece of paper, which I'm hoping you'll pull right now, called the Framework for Increasing Equity in School Discipline. It looks like this, for those of you who have really good vision. My colleagues and I have been culling lots of research and talking with practitioners to develop a comprehensive framework to look at the kind of the ecological approach to affecting change and eradicating disparities. And what you'll see here is, not surprisingly, we have an orientation towards prevention. And actually today I think we're going to be talking a lot about prevention. Building strong relationships as prevention. You can see that's the first bullet, supportive relationships. But we cannot forget, as everybody knows as educators, relationships are interconnected with academic content, engaging and motivating instruction, culturally responsive teaching, bias awareness and respectful school environments. And I think we're more and more on board as a nation, I would say, with the notion that students need opportunities for practice and learning, the SEL idea of practice, so that schools can move away from a punitive mindset towards behavior. But we should also be thinking about intervention. What is equity-oriented intervention? We argue that first you have to keep an eye on your data, which if you're PBIS work here in the room, you're doing that. We also talked about the idea of a problem-solving approach. So how many folks are using restorative practices or justice in their school districts? Okay, so I think of that as a problem-solving approach, right? You got restorative conferencing or responsive or reactive circles. And the great thing about that is you can hit the next bullet. You can engage student and family voice in that problem-solving. And then finally, more and more schools are carefully thinking about how to re-enter, smoothly bring students back into school if they've been in juvenile detention or if they've had long-term suspensions, and that's another important process. How many of you have a re-entry process? I'm just curious. Okay, so not as many. That can be a typical response, I've seen that. And of course, we had to hit up the multi-tiered system of support, so big shout out here to PBIS. But today, let's get to the focus on relationships. I would say this, that the success of all your reform efforts hinge on the quality of teacher, student, administrator, student, family, administrator, family, teacher relationships. So we can just think how fundamental the trusting relationships are. So I have watched a lot of restorative conferences where there's not the trust in the conference, and it all just falls flat. And the students I interview afterwards say, oh, they weren't going to listen to what I had to say anyway. It's already decided. So even though you're trying to do this kind of reparation, it's going through the motions because the relationship base wasn't there. So this is a moment where I'm going to ask you to reflect. So take a moment in your own head, everybody here. From your early schooling, college, graduate school, who are the educators that really influenced you, that really you connected with? So let their faces float into your head. Who are, think way back or more recently, or even currently. Let those faces pop into your head. So in my perspective, we stand on their shoulders, really. So all those educators that are now kind of their ghosts are in the room or in our heads at least. We stand on their shoulders. And I think what we want to do today is ask your current students in 5 years the same question and have your educators pop into their heads. We want those deep, meaningful relationships that really propel students through schooling to just really increase in your school, in your diverse classrooms. So here's a question for your table. when you observe a teacher, what do you see that convinces you the teacher has good relationships with students? What do you see? What can you really, really see? So say one of your teachers in your districts has great relationships, and everybody kind of knows that in the building, they're that relationship teacher, but if you walked upon them, what are they doing? What do you see? So can you take a minute to turn to each other and just talk with each other, maybe even take a minute to write some notes to yourself so you can reflect, and we'll do this for about 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay, 30 more seconds. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for engaging in this mini assignment. In the interest of time, I'm going to do a little kind of popcorn, just ask you guys to each table shout out a word, and for people watching or streaming, I'm going to repeat it in the mic, so we don't have to worry about circulating the mic right now. How about this table? What do you see?
Humor, shared humor.
Humor, shared humor. This table.
Listening.
Listening.
Well, we were talking about deep listening, reciprocal relationships, maybe since they still listening.
Okay, deep listening, reciprocal relationships. Anyone else? Other tables?
Authenticity.
Authenticity. Interesting one. Yes?
Enjoyment.
Enjoyment. Fun. Enthusiasm. Nice.
High level of awareness and honest empathy.
Honest empathy and a high level of awareness. Okay. So thanks for that. I think you picked up on some of these domains I'm going to touch on in a minute when I talk about a professional development coaching program. But we see good relationships spanning all of these domains. It's not just that hallway conversation, right? People often say, well, stand at the door, stand at the hallway. When, a shake hands, high five, how's your grandma? That's all good stuff. But the quality of interaction matters across instructional domain, across how the organization of the class flows, the classroom management piece, and of course across the emotional support domain, which I think got picked up in more of what folks mentioned. So here's a little bit more of some research theory that I pulled together here about authoritative teachers. That concept I've been particularly intrigued with, the idea of consistency in their relationship, fairness, caring. But I also like self-determination theory, because that really picks up on students' need to demonstrate competency and the provision of autonomy support. I think that's a really recognized concept in a lot of classrooms, valuing students' feelings and leadership abilities. And then, of course, culturally responsive teachers, Geneva Gay's great work, knowing about students' cultural and social history, the relevancy, connecting with students around issues of marginalization, and building trust and understanding about students' lived realities. So this cannot be, it's a giant font because I think this can, from a research perspective, I can't kind of shout out this loud enough how important the quality of relation. It's been shown again and again and again and again, many studies, that students' experience of support in school is predictive of multiple different outcomes in school. We need to take the relational resources in school as seriously as we might take kind of the instructional resources. But for many students, fractious relationships begin in preschool. It's very sad to think about the documentation from the Office of Civil Rights that racial disparities begin in preschool. And so I put a snowball here, thinking about the kind of paper cuts over time of negative interactions with adults. If you've had them over time, how alienating that can be for students. And in fact, they can culminate in a relationship gap. So we have some accruing evidence that schools aren't one school climate, they're microclimates, to keep with the climate metaphor, where some groups are experiencing schools very differently. The student sitting next to you in class with their fellow peers may be experiencing the school very differently than your own group. And we can see some very difficult findings about Black and Latino students, particularly finding school less supportive and caring than white students. And in fact, a recent study came out showing that discipline gaps are actually greater in schools where students feel less support. Okay, so here we're going to move to some more actionable ideas. Got some frameworks in our mind and hopefully I've convinced you of the power of relationships. I don't think you'd be here if you didn't already kind of buy into that. I'm going to be talking about my teaching partner for about 15 minutes. So this program, I want to tell you about mostly for you to reflect on your own coaching program. So how many have mentor programs in their districts or coaching programs of some sort for teachers in the classroom? Okay, great. So while you hear this presentation, I would suggest not getting too particularistic about my teaching partner, but think more about your own programs. What are the implications of our findings for your own programs? So a few characteristics to point out. It's sustained. So I'm going to show you a study where teachers were paired with a coach for 2 years. Non-evaluative. Okay, so it wasn't, their coach relationship was sacred in the sense that it wasn't feeding in to their evaluation. It focused on interactions using videotape. I think this is really key. It wasn't a PLC in the sense that a bunch of teachers are sitting reflecting on their practice. I think those can be powerful. Professional learning communities. However, we use videotape to get very close to how are the teachers interacting with the adolescents. And it's rigorous in the sense that we're using a research-based tool to guide what you look at, what the coach looks at, and the teacher looks at. So all the teachers and coaches are trained in what's called the class, and they use that tool to actually hone in on pieces of the parts of the teaching, just moments. It could be 30-second snippet or a 2-minute snippet that elucidates a principle in this rubric. And then finally, here's another key piece. It's strength-based. This is not a deficit model. I found this diamond in the rough at 13 minutes into your video, and let's think about what happened right there in that moment when you were interacting with that team. And let's build that. Let's think about growing that. So I think that's also another big piece of this. So those are 4 components are important to think about in terms of your own teaching program. And by the way, this is an important piece. This was developed at the University of Virginia, and a lot of this work comes out of Robert Pianta and Bridget Hamre's work. And they also developed the class. This is the class. So here's all our dimensions that we look at when we look at good teaching. And you can see here that we're looking at how positive interactions unfold across these domains. So I think this is another piece. It's not just the social and emotional domain for relationship building. It's also, as I said before, organizational, and instructional. So in your packet, given this is such a small font, you will see this figure. And it looks like this. might be easier for me to walk you through the coaching cycle if you're looking at the sheet because the font gets very small up here. So think about, again, reference your own coaching and mentoring programs. The first thing the teacher is step one, they record the video. They send it to their coach. So they themselves select a class to record, they send it to their coach who carefully reviews the video and splices the video according to the class. So they use the class to find how are different dimensions in the teaching elucidated, and then they send that clip back to the teacher, so this is distance coaching, with certain very structured prompts. You know, I see this, what do you see? Reflect, so there's reflection built in. And you can see step 3, the teacher reviews the selected video and responds to the prompts. And then the teacher and the coach, step 4, on the phone or in person, talk to each other about the prompts, the reflection, the practice, the different pieces that the coach had pulled out. They write a summary and an action plan to say, okay, well, how am I going to grow this in my next class? How can I increase this practice? So in a couple randomized controlled trials, so these are experimental trials we conducted, we found that students' performance on standardized tests increased in the coached classrooms. It's really hard to budge standardized test performance. It held for all racial groups compared to the control classrooms where there was no change. Also what we found was observed student engagement increased and observed positive peer interactions. So something was, I think the peer interaction is kind of an intriguing finding. Something about the teaching changed and it rippled into the peer interactions. There was more kind of positive connection amongst the peers. But I'm going to focus on a study today to share with you some really exciting results that was recently conducted. So you can see that it's a pretty small-scale randomized controlled trial. You can look at these stats and think how do they line up with your own district in terms of the poverty levels and racial and ethnic composition. For those of you who aren't that familiar with the notion of a randomized controlled trial, the teachers were randomly, first they volunteered to participate, and then they were randomly assigned to either get coached by our My Teaching Partner coaches in a focal classroom that they picked that they were struggling in, or a control classroom. I'm sorry, the control group did not receive coaching. That was the other arm of the study. And they were equivalent. After we randomly assigned them, we then checked to make sure these teachers are equivalent on many, many dimensions, and in fact they were. And this is what we found. So let me break this down for you. After 1 year of being coached, the teachers in My Teaching Partner, this is this intervention box over here, sorry, on this side, we see that they had similar use of office discipline referrals for African American students versus all the other students in the classroom. So they had no racial disparities in discipline. But look at the control teachers. Remember, they didn't get the coaching. This is actually reflective of lots of national statistics. They were kind of like what you might see in a lot of different districts and schools. So that was 1 year of coaching. So then we thought, oh wow, was this a fluke? We weren't targeting discipline, we were targeting relationship building and motivating, engaging instruction. Let's see what happens next year. And we found this same finding. After 2 years of coaching, same finding. Then the grant ended, but we kept following the teachers, and the coach support was no longer there. And this is what we found. The coaching was discontinued, and the racial discipline gap remained closed for My Teaching Partner teachers the next school year. So I was pretty blown away by this finding. You know, I do a lot of this work, so I can feel kind of cynical about change or sustained change, but I was really excited to see that this may indicate that something really shifted in a practice that they were doing, something about the coaching. So we dug deeper and we wanted to know, well, why? How did this happen? How can we explain this? See in red here, these are what we call dimensions in the class. We coded videotapes, so my coders at Rutgers were blinded to condition, or shielded rather, from condition. And they coded the videotapes. They watched videotapes and they coded for different dimensions on the class to see if they saw them as high or low. Teachers who improved on teacher sensitivity got better at consistently noticing when students needed extra support. They got better at responding to students' academic and social and emotional needs, and they were more effective in addressing student concerns and problems. So, someone who did a lot of the coding myself, I can say that these teachers were attentive to the group, but they were also to group needs that came up, but they also could adeptly address individuals well and respond to them with their attention. Teachers who improved on this dimension, analysis and inquiry, also referred at low rates their African American students, kicked them out of class at lower rates. They became more consistent in providing challenging questions and activities to apply skills using analysis, creation, evaluation. So basically they had very complex tasks for students to problem solve. Those classrooms were more fun to watch. There was big picture thinking going on. It wasn't so much memorization and multiple choice. It was really big picture problem solving. So how the challenge then becomes in your coaching programs is how, if we take these findings, and again, it's we have more replication to do, but let's scale up here and think, how can your coaching programs increase teacher sensitivity and analysis and problem solving? So for analysis and problem solving, again, we want to create opportunities to make inferences and evaluate data and opinions, to create original products, kind of move towards conceptual knowledge and thinking rather than memorization. So why do you think these two dimensions, as they shifted, reduced teachers' referrals with Black students? What is it about at this next stage we have to speculate. In these classrooms that were diverse, what went on for these teachers? What could we speculate may have gone on to shift referral patterns? So we've got kind of a social and emotional dimension and something about the instruction. Does anyone have any thoughts they want to share?
The instruction became relevant and more interesting, so there were fewer behavior problems.
Okay, so one hypothesis is that the instruction became more relevant and interesting. So maybe students were maybe more engaged and fewer behavioral issues. So I might kind of think a little bit more too about how that could kind of spiral positive relationships, positive back and forths. And on this slide, I want to point out that we could speculate that something really fundamentally shifted for the Black students. Perhaps they felt they were treated as scholars and scientists. That the whole experience of the instruction shifted how their relationship with their teachers. And on the flip side, what about the teachers' perceptions? Could have teaching in this way, this kind of engaging way, big picture ideas, could it have also shifted how they saw their Black students and seeing them as scholars and scientists and undoing any kind of perhaps unaware implicit biases they might hold? Those are some open questions, but this is the only randomized controlled trial in the nation that I'm aware of that has shown these kinds of results from a teacher coaching program. More and more studies are starting to look at race and discipline referrals, so hopefully we'll have some more coming out in the future. But it's pretty exciting for us to consider the effects. So here's something for us to reflect on as a group. How do your programs line up with my teaching partner? Are they sustained over time? Are they focused on concrete teacher behaviors? Are they rigorous, using a research-based rubric? Are they strength-based, where they kind of can reinforce and strengthen behavior over time, strengthen teacher behavior, positive teacher behavior over time? So I'm going to shift gears after this. So this is a chance to ask questions about my teaching partner. I also have a slide up here to show you where to get, more information about MTP. But now just a few questions. Anything before shifting away from this program? Yes.
What are the qualifications of the coaches?
Great question. The question was, what are the qualifications of the coaches? So we did have a range. We had mostly veteran teachers, I would say, who had been in the classroom for many years. I would say, having watched them in action, that they had very good clinical skills in terms of building trust with their teachers. they had to take on teachers who it took sometimes almost a year to really, there was a lot of fear that the coach would go back to the administration and kind of quote unquote rat them out or something. So to be vulnerable with your coach took a lot of trust building and kind of slow ramping. We do have a protocol where they go through each of the dimensions of the class as they're working on it. And that was kind of debated about a lot because it's, some teachers thought, I don't have to work on this, but the coach would think, yeah, I can see that you do, there are things to work on. So that's the clinical nuance of really building rapport and trust. Yes?
I'm not clear if the coach is located outside of the school or if it is people in the school. And if it's located outside of the school, have there been any attempts to set up like a peer coaching kind of similar program?
Thank you, great question. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear on that. In this study, the coaches were distant. They were distance coaching using kind of Skype and, however, as this project has scaled to other districts, there's been a lot of interest in having a train-the-trainer model. So in-house, so having my teaching partner folks train their coaches. And in terms of the peer model, I love that question because this is the kind of next frontier in terms of this work, is we're trying to see if we can take the kind of positive ingredients of this coaching model and turn it into a peer PLC type model where teachers do kind of a show and glow, where they bring snippets of their video to elucidate different dimensions of class and they work with each other. And so in a lot of the planning and piloting of that work, we've had to also have the outside coaches be a little bit of a fly on the wall, because the fear sometimes in PLCs, if you have them in your schools, is they go off the rails a little bit in terms of the content. And so we've really had to develop very structured protocols of how to stick with the video in the class, and so we've done some good piloting work on that, but it's a work in progress. Okay.
We have one more.
Oh, one more. I'm all out. Okay, I gotta get to the next piece. I'll take your question.
Sorry, can I throw a few?
A few questions. Okay.
You don't have to answer them all. How much coaching time, on average, I guess, required or needed? Just wondering how expensive or feasible it is. And then, how do you match the coach with the teacher? Is that a matching mechanism? And also I'm curious about the teacher's background. Maybe I can just know the article, I can go in and study about this.
Okay. So first, I'll start with the last. The teachers' backgrounds. We had special ed teachers in this project. We had general ed teachers. We didn't find any differences. We probably didn't have the statistical power to detect differences, but we had teachers who had different levels of years in the profession that it held, different race and ethnicities that it held, different ages. So, and we never found any particular teacher characteristics where the coaching behaved kind of differently, so to speak. In terms of the time, so the cycles, I don't think I mentioned this, happened every 2 weeks. All right, so it was this continual kind of videotape, sending your tape, but most teachers did 6 to 9 cycles in a school year. So there were some teachers who did 6, because we were just hounding them a bit more to get their tapes in. So I hope that helps you a little bit on the time. I mean, because it takes the time is the videotaping, sending it in, reading the prompts. It's not overly onerous, but yeah, and I don't have the cost of the program. We did cost it out in one of our articles. So if you kind of back channel, I can send you a citation that will talk some more about the costs.
So you provided coaching to 40 some odd teachers with how many coaches?
We had 3 coaches in that project. So what we've done in other districts is we've had people get coached and then they become coaches themselves. So again, that kind of that mushroom model where you get more and more people who've been coached and then they become coaches, and to create more sustainability and capacity building. I mean, that's logical. Obviously, we cannot sustain having outside coaching programs. You need to build capacity within your district. Okay. So thanks for bearing with me as I PowerPointify you. You're doing well. Is everyone holding up? Doing okay? Okay, good. Because we got a little more time together here, so I have till 2:30. I'm going to keep packing it in. All right, so I haven't mentioned culturally relevant and responsive teaching in bias-aware classrooms. And before I go in to tell you about a free online professional development module, I do want to touch back on these issues because I think we get into this more in the core, which I'll present to you. This is what I've been thinking a lot about these days, a culturally conscious and bias-aware approach to relationship building. I think that really sounds great, right? So now we can figure out, well, what in the world does that mean? So I think that's another kind of work for today. So Gloria Latson-Billing, she helps us out a bit here when we think about culturally responsive teachers. And her teachers in her study affirmed and celebrated cultures, so some of this should sound familiar to you. Maybe what's not as familiar is this notion of bias awareness. This idea that understanding deeply that differences in schools can be policed and regulated, that racism and negative stereotypes can contribute to punitive treatment of students of color, and that's been my focus here today. I think this one is harder for people, educators, to get their head around, but that deeply ingrained, culturally bound notions of appropriate behavior may impact everyday interactions. This is where we gotta get more fuzzy in our thinking. And so, to help us a little bit, I turned to Edward Hall, and you have this beautiful color printout in your folder. How many people have seen this cultural iceberg? All right, that's why I'm not gonna spend too much time on it, but I think it's a good reference point for us when we talk about culture, right? That there's deep culture and surface culture. And he's got all of these different ways deep culture may manifest themselves in the classroom listed here. So I think when talking about becoming culturally conscious, we need to open up our dialogue around how our expectations for good or bad behavior may be grounded in our own personal histories. Now, in the remaining time today, I'm going to touch back on these issues and present to you today a teacher professional development program that kind of pulls in my perspective, pulls a lot of what I've been talking about together today. So here we go. We're going to embark on understanding more about the core. And I have a part 2 of this talk after the student panel today. So we'll start here, and this is where I'm going to delve into some very practical strategies. So the first practical strategy to know is the core is right there. You can access it. It's free, thanks to our funders, publicly available. The whole professional development program is on building relationships. It's comprised of 5 modules that teachers go through. We suggest teachers take modules 1 and 2, and then it's a little choose your own adventure. But today I'm going to orient you to this in pretty good detail so you can decide, do I want to take this back to my teaching staff and my colleagues or not? You can also decide certain parts of it seem more compelling or relevant to your district than others. So the first thing is to know, this is a 6 to 8 hour PD. It's interactive. So it's not just talking heads. Teachers type in, they watch videos, they do observations and comment on it, they answer some multiple choice. Now the first thing I need to do is orient you to the theory of the core. So you remember all these bubbles. I'm gonna really nail this by the end of the day, so you're gonna get these bubbles. This should be in your packet too. Yes, so it's this packet. And I'm going to go through the 5 modules today and picking out some of my more favorite strategies. But let me orient you to the theory, because this looks pretty complicated, right? It's kind of the technology of developing relationships. So one of our blue bubbles is this idea of interactions. So relationships result from repeated interactions over time. When positive and supportive, the moment-to-moment interactions build strong connections. So we're looking to help teachers build positive interactions over time. The next factor in this model, the next blue bubble, is this notion of observation. And this is all drawn, by the way, from a lot of it is from my teaching partner work at Castle from the University of Virginia, but it's the idea that observation is really key to building good relationships. And like a skill, we need to practice it. What we need to be able to do in classrooms is step back and observe students in a more objective fashion, and especially students you're struggling with, to really try to detect some of their needs. The next is this notion of being aware. So we aim to through the core, foster awareness about beliefs and perceptions. I'm going to start with this module. Our thoughts, feelings, and perceptions mold our past experiences. It influences how we react moment to moment. So imagine this has powerful consequences when building relationships. So increasing your awareness is going to be key to helping you form stronger connections with students. And these three bubbles work together to develop stronger relationships. I'm going to talk through an example of this theory because I think it's hard. It sounds very abstract, but let me give you an example to bring it to life. All right, so here's just a picture to look at. I'm going to tell you a story. Okay, it's the first week of school. Imagine a teacher standing in front of their classrooms, asking the group of students a question. A very typical scenario, right? But as the discussion ensues, there's a squirmy student sitting in the back. And that student in her head thinks to herself, oh no, here we go. I had one of these students like this last year. I'm gonna have to manage this student. I'm gonna have to kind of circle around this, figure out how to manage this student. This could be a behavioral issue. So she decides to ignore the squirmy student and thinks, I don't wanna reinforce that behavior, so I'm just not gonna attend to it. And the student then, I'm going to go to the student's mind, feels pretty excluded, alien from the kind of participation. He starts to withdraw from the discussion. Now the teacher's belief in him as a troublemaker starts to get reinforced. And these types of negative cycles start to reinforce. Now, but let's break it down here a little bit again from the core model. So if we look at the be awareness circle, again, she had that thought, oh, this is it. This is, this kind of behavior signals that the student's gonna give me trouble. She then observes the behavior of the squirmy student and thinks, makes an interpretation of that behavior, the meaning of that behavior. This student's gonna kind of get out to get me in trouble. I know I'm being kind of extreme here. But then the interactions, what happens? She decides not to call on him. But what happens if we redo it? So we take this scenario, we back it up, let's try a different scenario. So first the teacher sees the student's behavior and thinks, yeah, okay, that student's more dysregulated than most. But the student looks like he wants to answer a question. She sees the behavior, so she interprets the behavior differently as a cue for support. He needs some help during group time. He needs help learning to build skills. So the teacher steps to the back of the room and looks him in the eye, calls on him, and he settles into his chair and he responds. And then what we see is a very different scenario, launching two different paths for relationship building. So hopefully for that squirmy student, what she's done is launch a path of positive interactions. And so the core basically is trying to teach teachers about each of those bubbles to strengthen their relationship. And the core, to back up again, the core is designed, it has lots of videos and clips of K-8 classrooms, but the principles apply to the high school level too. Again, it takes about 6 to 8 hours to complete. All right, I'm gonna start with the be aware bubble. Module 2 is called Recognizing and Understanding Our Own Lenses and Practical Strategies for Increasing Awareness. This is, every time you see the core insignia, see it in the corner there? That's taken straight from the program. So you'll get to know the program. Every time you see that slide, you'll know, okay, that's in there. That's what my teachers or my colleagues would be exposed to if they decide to watch this. Okay, so this, we start with talking to teachers about past beliefs and how they're mental shortcuts. They can be really useful to create templates, right? But if you layer in negative stereotypes about groups, then it can be pretty pernicious. So some of these beliefs actually might be outside of our awareness. They could be implicit. We hear people talking about implicit bias. They may contradict your explicit egalitarian values. So we know that implicit bias doesn't always link at all to our beliefs, our conscious beliefs. We include teachers and professionals in the core talking about different types of harmful beliefs that can be held about their students. So here's a sample response from a teacher. We asked teachers to type in some of the responses to these kinds of questions. What kinds of negative stereotypes may be affecting educators and their beliefs about students at your school? You can see this teacher is concerned about perceptions of English language learners. And when you create beliefs, you can actually then shift your behavior of how much resources you're going to give those students. So a buzzword when we were developing the core became watch lists. The teacher we interviewed said, yeah, we all create watch lists. And everybody knows in the school who's on the watch list. And this teacher told us about her watch list. And it was gang affiliation. And this is what she had to say. And on the core, you'll hear her say it in her own words. Hopefully you can see this in the back or pull it up on your own screen. Then she goes on to say, although you're doing adult things and your mind's on adult things, you still have to see them as a child who's 13 or 12, who needs that support, who needs that instruction. And I found a lot of times these kids are extremely intelligent, but the stigmas, being put into certain categories. The teachers sometimes have a bias when they don't even pull them in or try to tap their learning. It's more like, oh yeah, you're a gang member, you do bad things, I've heard bad things about your family, you and your family. So she really sees this come to life in the sense that teachers aren't going to invest their time in some of those students. Dr. Eddie Fergus we interview on the core too, and he talks about the self-presentation, saggy pants, and the idea of what do people think of saggy pants. So we're going to hear from him in a minute of some of his insights about perceptions of saggy pants. But with that said, I wanted to take a minute for you at your own tables to address these kinds of questions. What types of unspoken watch lists are in your districts, in your school? What types of student or parent dress or self-presentation do you personally find challenging to understand? How could all these perceptions impact your interactions? So could you turn to each other at your table and take a couple minutes? Okay, so Dr. Eddie Fergus, he comments on how disruptive to the psyche, as he says it, saggy pants can be for some educators. So he's got some powerful quotes here. I'm going to whiz through it because I want to actually play a video for you. Part of the module, we talk about a very practical strategy, which a lot of people think, oh, that's a no-brainer. Take students' perspectives. I think it's really easy for us to give that lip service, though, and think about how hard it is when you're, especially if you've had a discipline incident with a kid. You don't really want to take their perspective. You're upset with them. But I think it's absolutely key for us to understand where students are coming from. Because we can get pretty confused about, we can make inference about what they're thinking and their intentions. I used to run a teacher-student mediation program, and there was constant confusion in the conflicts. Like, why did you come over to me? You just always pick me out and target me. And the teacher would say, I come to you to help you. I think I'm just giving you extra help. And the teacher says, you need to back off. You think I don't know it. So just these mixes of perceptions, of lack of understanding of each other's perceptions. So right now, what I thought, we're going to hear from a panel of students, and we're going to hear from some of their perspectives, which is fabulous. But in the core, we also integrate this wonderful video from Color Lines. We're going to just watch 5 minutes and 44 seconds. So for those of you who are streaming, you can find the link on the next slide. And so go ahead and pull it up on your own device, and we're gonna watch 5 minutes and 44 seconds. So, and when you watch this, think about perspective taking and really trying to understand these young men's perspectives about inequality in schooling.
There's days in my school where there will be 3 black kids in the class, and after the first little quarter, you begin your work and you have pretty good grades, but the teacher will be like, she'll pull those 3 black kids aside, like, you guys need to separate from each other, you're distracting the class. And there might be 3 white girls in the back laughing the entire class, and the only thing she'll say is be quiet. Being black comes with the stereotypes of being loud, disruptive, and always angry when you don't get your way. I just think I just wanted to be heard, I should say. Especially being one of the few black kids in your class, just being heard is one of the big things for me. So I don't think teachers try to do it, but they do.
I'm the one who gets sent out the classroom. All the kids look at me like, oh, he got issues, you know, he got to leave the class once every 3 periods because, you know, but that's just, you know, it's also my fault because, you know, that's who I choose to sit next to, you know.
I remember back in first grade, this situation is not first. So I forgot why, but for some reason, a girl was crying, a white girl, she was crying, and the teacher called me over, and the girl told her that I made her cry. I pushed her down. I was like, I didn't, because I actually hadn't. And I kept on saying I hadn't, it wasn't me. And I guess the girl didn't know exactly who it was, or she thought it was me. But then the teacher took her word for it. And I got sent to the office. And that was one of the things at such a young age, where I was just like, wow, why exactly?
So like, if I tell my parents, like, there's something going on at school between the teacher, and like, my mom, she's like, you go over there? I'm like, no, I don't. Because like, it's gonna have a bad effect on the looks of me and her. Because like, she's gonna go over there like the angry, mad black woman, and then the teacher's gonna get a stereotype of her, and then she's like, oh, that's why he's doing bad at school, or that's why that. And so I try to like fix it on my own to like be back at the teacher and to let them know like I'm not what they think I am.
One of the things that bothered me was my teachers would grade me differently based on this is at first, they would maybe grade me a little bit easier based on the color of my skin than they did my white counterparts. And I felt like as teachers, they had internalized the belief that because I'm black, my expectations of the type of work that I could do was less than maybe some other students. So when I walked in the room, they automatically thought that the work that I was going to do maybe wouldn't have been as articulate or as progressed as some of the other kids, just based off the way I look. And that's how are black kids coming in after me supposed to feel if they're history, English, math, science teachers, when they first walk in, believe that they're not as smart as other kids.
I know I'm smarter than the teacher thinks, so I'm gonna take, you know, what they give me, and I'm gonna take advantage of it and turn it around into that A or that B plus that the teacher didn't think I could get. Or if they give me this extra help that I know I don't need, you say, okay, thank you, but you finish it before everybody else does, and it just slaps the teacher in the face.
No matter how many Louis Armstrongs there are, no matter how many James Baldwins there are, we're always going to be looked at different, you know, always, just because of our skin color. I mean, you know, we are in shackles, but they're just gold plated, so it looks like, you know, we are okay. But at the end of the day, like, we're always going to be shackled up into that category, you know. That's just how it is.
I feel like they like take black people and then they're like, here you go, put you in this box. This is how you're supposed to act. You can't come outside of this because you can't act this way. This area right here, this is white, so you have to stay inside the black box. Like, I hear a lot, like, if there's like a black person being really articulate, knowing what they're talking about, oh, are you talking white? Like, what exactly is talking to white? Like, so being articulate and intelligent, that's talking white, that's acting white.
Yeah, you hear the term, oh, why are you trying to act so black?
Right.
Like that's less than.
Right. It's called straight up weak.
Yeah.
You can't play this sport. They can be the best person on the team, but they're weak because they don't look like everybody else.
Well, when I'm with black people, I'm acting white. And when I'm with white people, I'm acting black. And I feel like I don't really have a place. Like, where do I fit in? Where am I just myself? Where am I just me?
And some black people say, don't act your color. Like, I need you to act so-called white right now. It makes me feel like, for some reason, among the whole world, my color is put down to just put down another level. It doesn't make me feel good inside. It makes me feel a little angry with myself, because I feel like I'm supposed to do something to try to change it, but I don't know where to start.
It's a lot of division in between the black races, man.
Yeah.
Why can't we just
So in the core, we asked teachers to reflect on, for example, what Harrison had to say here. Should ring a bell from the opening of it. He ends with, I don't think teachers try to do it, but they do. So I guess one thing just to open up for discussion is how can a teacher engage in Harrison's perspective about that discipline incident that he mentioned? Or for that matter, this whole video and these students' perspectives. What do you think, what are some of your feelings that came up during this video in terms of trying to take the students' perspectives? I just want to open it up for discussion. In the back.
Thank you. I enjoyed the video and I appreciated their openness. One thing, as a Native American woman, I would just love to see the conversation expand to include students with disabilities, Latinos, Asian Americans, and sometimes when we get in that binary conversation, we leave out so many groups, and as a Native, I feel like we've been invisible for far too long, so thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I second and third and fourth that, and I'm sorry to be perpetuating that. Again, the research is so paltry on so many of these groups. It's just a shame, and I'm sorry to be perpetuating that here. But thank you. I appreciate your comment. Other thoughts or reactions? How would this be seen potentially by some of your own staff or educators? Could it be used as a tool to start considering student perspectives about issues of race and fairness?
I think so. I think in terms of even with the coaching, that there's a level of cognitive dissonance involved in this. And so seeing those responses and then as a teacher becoming aware of it and starting to pay attention to it, track it, what is actually going on, would be highly beneficial.
What comes up for me too, and I just wrote up some of my thoughts and reactions, is the idea of what's called procedural fairness. When students don't experience fair treatment, they're less likely actually to cooperate. I think this has been shown in a lot of adult research on the legitimacy of authority. So when we're treated more fairly, we think it's due process, fair process, we'll pay that ticket or we'll comply. And I think that's really important to think about, that students' responses to a request or an ask relate to experiences of fairness in the classroom. And I think another piece is, to engage in this, you have to understand as a teacher that historical harms are still in classes today, right? That they're still living and breathing in kids and communities and their feelings in the room. It's not all about that incident that just occurred. It's about a history of oppression and discrimination and negation. And so I think when teachers understand the larger context, I interviewed 50 teachers. How did they respond when they were called racist? What did they do? Well, first of all, I should say 48 of them said that had occurred to them. And most of them dismissed it with humor. They said, oh, no, come on. I treat everyone fairly. And I understand that can, in the context, may have been appropriate. But other times, some teachers said, this is one quote from a teacher, I said, what did I do wrong? I don't know everything. Help me out. And it totally changed their relationship. They took that student aside and just sat with them and didn't dismiss it and said, tell me more about what's going on. You feel like I'm not treating you fairly and that it's racist and there's something about your skin color and my attitudes. Let's talk about this. I'm deeply concerned that you experience this in my class. But I can say from interviewing that 50, that was a very rare response. So I think there's this issue of courageous conversations from Singleton's work that comes up, is the idea of bringing up fairness and historical wrongs and unintentional behavior, and really trying to kind of contextualize those relationships within the socio-historical history that kids are living with every day. So with that said, I'm actually coming, I made my time, which is great. Mickey's liking, I'm keeping time. So today what we've covered, we've talked a little bit about root causes, but I really wanted to get to the power of relationships I introduced you to my teaching partner, or MTP as we call it. I kind of dipped our toe in the water of culturally conscious and bias-aware relationships. So I think that's kind of a powerful concept to keep unpacking. And then I introduced you to the core. So later today, I'm going to hit up on all these practical strategies. I'm going to whiz through them because I really want to leave you with some ideas to take back. We're going to talk about the notion of observing objectively, recognizing ruts. We already touched on taking your students' perspectives, getting to know students and different ways to do that. Today, someone mentioned bringing enthusiasm into the class and fun, focusing on what matters, et cetera, et cetera. So we're gonna go and get close to those. So there we go. That's it for me for part one. Any other questions about any of the concepts I brought up today, or my teaching partner, or the core, or the framing I opened with?
I'd just like, on the last statement, if you're having a conversation, what did I do wrong? I don't know everything, help me out. I think if an administrator or a peer, my teaching partner, is having that conversation, and initiates that conversation, it's likely that the adult, the teacher, becomes defensive. If that teacher is having that conversation with a student, it's likely that that student perceives that as authentic and recognizes that this is somebody who really wants to work on. So we go from defensive to authentic and engaged. And I think where you're having that conversation really ends up mattering.
Where you're having the conversation matters. That gets back to your concept of authentic empathy, right? Yeah. That students are real detectors of when people are faking it, right? So the authenticity and that kind of, a colleague of mine once called it racial sensitivity signaling. How much do the teachers say, yeah, I'll go there with you. Let's talk about this issue of power imbalance in society, or in this room, or in this interaction. I'll talk about that with you. So I think that's also part of that empathic perspective taking, or authentic empathy, is opening the door to talk about issues of power and privilege and equity with your students. It takes a fluency to do that. I think that the fear is because people don't have the language, they haven't had the practice of engaging these conversations. Yes?
I think what's coming up for me is how much, what do you do with resistance, right? When you're working with resistant teachers who aren't oriented or interested or even believe, right, that this is a valid place to go. And so, yeah, how do you handle resistance in this kind of coaching model?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you heard that because it's mic'd. So we wrote the core from the framework of resistance. We just piloted it with about 200 teachers, and there was about 5 who kind of reacted strong out of the 200 who reacted strongly, saying, "What are you trying to say? I treat all my students fairly." But we will successfully engaged the bulk of teachers. So in that group, you have the people who think, I know this, I do this. But then you also have the people who really had a harder time hearing about the Be Awareness module, for instance. And I think we successfully did it, but we worked from that standpoint. But in intervention research, we call that the laggards. People are kind of like, oh, I don't want to get on board with this, or the resistors, like you're calling them. But there's a reason for resistance. So I think you have to kind of also delve in. What's the fear underlying it? And so you have to, on some level, I think coaches need to address that. Is it feeling overwhelmed, blamed, feeling like they've lost a tool of sending kids out? There's something else going on there.
Yes, but I'm a little concerned that we're putting students in the position of doing professional development with us. And I certainly think that there are some students who can sensitively understand authentic behavior like we were talking about before. But I think there are more students that are developmentally right on the scale, very appropriate for their developmental sequences, and would never be able to bridge that power struggle if I, as an adult, sit down with one student one-on-one and say, tell me what I did wrong. And if that student can't do that developmentally,
then do I take back the message, I tried, obviously I'm doing everything right? Because developmentally, the student could not build that bridge. And quite frankly, these are students, and it's our job to go through professional development, diagnostics, to help ourselves and each other as the adults in the classroom and in the school to learn that material so that we don't put students in that behavior. And I recognize that there are definitely some students that could do this, but the model suggests that all, and I'm not sure all could do that.
I didn't mean to suggest that the students are becoming professional development folks for us. I think there's just not enough mindfulness put into how to get at students' perspectives. And there's not a lot of space in the disciplinary process to really engage in a way when the kid and the teacher has cooled down from the incidents to try to, in the restorative justice work, I see some really good perspective taking. There's that calmer post-event reflection, and it's not so much I've seen lots of kids fill out reflection sheets that are like, here we go, and it feels really inauthentic on their part too. But I think perspective taking is part of the SEL development we're working on in schools anyway. So I think, I don't mean to put it on them. Okay, so now I'm going to flip and say, I think culturally competent teachers engage in their own knowledge building and skill building. I'm not saying, student, educate me everything about your community and your perspective. That feels like that's taking the onus off of the teachers as the professional who need to go and do the inquiry themselves. So I see where you're heading with that, but I didn't mean to imply that. All right, any other, it's 2:31. All right, we are rocking the time. So thanks for your attention. We're gonna move into break. So it's cookies and coffee time. We're gonna pick up the energy. We're gonna hear from students. So thanks for your attention.